Hey, buddy, watch this.
Hello, Regis Kilbin is the name and Hearthstone is the game, and these are the 5 rotating cards that I'll miss most. Now, if you're somehow hiding under a rock and you didn't know, the standard format rotation is almost upon us once again, and cards that were released in the year of the Kraken, in other words, cards from Whispers of the Old Gods, One Night in Karazhan, or Mean Streets of Gadget Zan's card sets, are all going to be rotating out of standard format, moving to wild format exclusively. So a lot of cards I've been used to playing pretty regularly in standard format, I'm no longer going to have access to in standard format, and frankly, I'm going to miss them because they do awesome, fun things. So I wanted to highlight the 5 cards I think I'll miss the most, the 5 cards that have been some standouts for me. Now, these aren't necessarily my favorite cards, but maybe they did something specific, provided some sort of utility, or they were just a ton of fun, so they're cards I'm going to miss. That said, let's go ahead and jump into the list. Up first here, even though these are in no particular order, is Dirty Rat. And this is one of those cards that has utility that I'm going to miss because Dirty Rat is such a great counter card. It's a really interestingly balanced and perfectly designed card in my mind. It's a 2-mana 2/6 taunt. That's fantastic, way overstated. But there's this downside to Dirty Rat is that when you play it, you can pull a minion from your opponent's hand. And if you look at that at a surface level, right, that always looked like a bad thing. Like, oh yeah, you get some stats, but the risk is insane. You could pull some super valuable minion out of your opponent's hand. But it turns out being able to pull minions out of your opponent's hand without their control is actually a great way to sometimes break up their combos in particular. So Dirty Rat has been a great tool to disrupt really combo-oriented decks in the meta, and basically it's seen play here and there in different metas ever since its release as that exact tool. It's perfect. And yes, sometimes it still backfires, but sometimes it steals you games that would otherwise be unwinnable by disrupting your opponent's entire game plan, playing their stuff out of order, killing their super high value things for free, pulling stuff into removal like Brawl and Twisting Nether. So Dirty Rat, because it's such a neat and interesting mechanic, such a cool counter tool that provides a lot of interaction that otherwise wouldn't necessarily be possible, it's the kind of card I'm going to miss, and I hope we see some sort of replacement of some sort or another in a future set, because not being able to break up or disrupt your opponent's combos can be super frustrating. So hopefully a pseudo Dirty Rat card will come in to take this one's place, because I'm certainly going to miss being able to slide Dirty Rat into my decks. Moving on to the number 2 card that I'll miss most here is Yogg-Saron. Now, there was once a time in Hearthstone where this card would have been on a list of cards I'm glad are rotating out of standard format, because there was once upon a time when Yogg was too good. It was too dominant, too influential, and the chaos that it created was stealing games out from under people, and that was really, really bad for Hearthstone. But once Yogg-Saron got nerfed so that he could kill himself or silence himself or give himself to your opponent, all of the potential downsides that exist with Yogg-Saron today, once that happened, Yogg-Saron became way less of a competitive card, very rarely played in actual competitive decks today, and that took him from sort of overpowered, oppressively crazy swing card that was way too random, and it turned him into a meme card, a card that was designed 100% for fun, and you really only play Yogg for goofs and for laughs, and as a streamer, as a content creator, that's fantastic for me. I absolutely love being able to toss a card in that is guaranteed to give you a laugh, guaranteed to give you some highlights. So I'm going to miss Yogg-Saron in sort of a greedy, selfish way as a streamer first, but also just because he really is a lot of fun. And I'm sure we'll still pop in a wild format occasionally, throw a Yogg-Saron in some decks and have some crazy good times. But just knowing that that's not going to be an option in standard format anymore does make me a little sad. So as much as Yogg-Saron has frustrated me in the past, man, he sure has brought me a lot of joy in the meantime lately. So Yogg-Saron will indeed be greatly missed. Moving on to my 3rd card here, it's another of the old gods from Whispers of the Old Gods. This time around, it's N'Zoth the Corruptor. And of course, N'Zoth has been a competitive card, even a competitive card right this very moment with Q-Block, which is dominating the standard format meta. And that's one of the reasons I like N'Zoth. He's one of these really awesome big bomb value cards in the late game that really only works in a super control style deck. and he actually works. And that's something we haven't really seen enough of in Hearthstone, I would argue. I love having a card like this, which is just so absurdly greedy, and you have to build your deck in a pretty greedy way too with all these crazy Death Rattle minions. And it's so much fun playing N'Zoth knowing that you just won the game because you swung so hard and your opponent can't deal with it. It's a little less fun in the Void Lord era, I would argue, because that's just maybe perhaps too good. Void Lord is so strong with N'Zoth. But beyond that, for the last couple of years, just knowing that you could always build some sort of N'Zoth deck in basically any class. It wouldn't always work, right? Because not every class has the Death Rattle minions or the tools necessary to get to a N'Zoth turn. But just having that value bomb that was always around, could always pop up from time to time, always served as sort of a menacing threat that you had to consider in the back of your mind anytime you saw your opponent running Death Rattles. N'Zoth still stands out as the ultimate Old God, and one of my favorite Whispers of the Old Gods cards, and maybe, frankly, one of my favorite cards of all time. I'm a big N'Zoth fan. I'm certainly going to miss having him around. I don't know how I'm going to build Death Rattle decks without him. Moving on to the number 4 spot here is a card that might surprise you. If you've watched my channel a lot, I don't really end up playing all that much Shaman, and I certainly don't end up playing Devolve all that often either, but I think Devolve is a really, really well-designed card. I love everything about this one because it does so many different things, right? It's a silence effect for your opponent's entire board, which can be really, really strong. But of course, sometimes that can also backfire. And I love when cards have a very reasonable amount of risk versus reward and a lot of decision making inherent to them, but also still potentially a lot of raw power. And Devolve does exactly that. Not only that, thematically it fits in perfect with the Evolve style Shaman that we see. You can evolve your own stuff or you can devolve your opponent's stuff. I love that two sides of the same coin. That's awesome that they built in both parts of that. The artwork is hilarious here too, taking essentially the gang bosses from Mean Streets of Gadget Zan and devolving them into Murlocs. So Devolve has absolutely been a playable card. It's been a great tool in Shaman. It sets up so many different things. The raw unpredictability of it is a lot of fun too, even though it's competitively viable, usually always good. It can still result in some crazy moments when you devolve into an Anomalous or you accidentally give your opponent an Tyrion instead of a Void Lord. There's all kinds of shenanigans that can occur with Devolve, and that's what makes it perfect for somebody like me. It's a great balance between fun, competitive, interesting, fair. It's just one of those cards that seems like an absolute standout in every single way, and probably one of the better designed cards I think I've ever seen in Hearthstone. It's going to be sad to see Devolve leave standard format. And then finally at the number 5 spot here, this is a card I didn't think I'd have to talk about in a video like this. I thought Cold Light Oracle was a classic card and it would be staying in standard format forever, but lo and behold, in the most recent Hall of Fame announcement, it turns out Call of the Wild is moving to the Hall of Fame, no longer going to be in standard format. It is rotating out, so it has earned a spot on this list because I really like Cold Light Oracle. I didn't think this is a card that belonged in the Hall of Fame. I can understand Blizzard's logic a little bit. It can be frustrating to play against. It can remove fun from players, but on the other hand, it just adds a whole level of depth to the game that is otherwise impossible right now because drawing cards for your opponent opens up a lot of different things you can do because you can suddenly play mill-style decks where you try to just draw your opponent a ton of cards and fatigue them out. There's also some really positive interactions and punishing moments if your opponent just builds a giant hand. Then guess what? You can play Cold Light Oracle and burn cards. Now, that's not always fun when you get your cards burned, but it's an interaction, it's some strategy, it's some depth that otherwise just isn't in the game. So when you take Cold Light Oracle out, you're removing a win condition from Hearthstone right now. Perhaps they'll replace that with other cards. We don't know. But you're removing some consideration and some risk from people when you're building decks. You can be greedier with your hand size, so things like Handlock and Super Control decks don't have as many ways to be punished without a card like Cold Light Oracle. You're removing a tool from hyper-aggressive decks that need to draw a ton of cards to fuel their incoming or their outgoing damage and their burst potential and just their reload options. So across the board, this card just does a lot of unique things that nothing else does in a couple different vectors. And with it removed from standard format, that just really limits people's options, limits your ways to play the game, and I think that's unfortunate. So it's certainly a high power card, a competitive card across a variety of different decks, and I'm very, very sad that it was moved to the Hall of Fame. I'm going to be sad to see this one go. And there you have it, folks. Those are my 5 cards that are rotating that I'll miss the most. I know that standard format rotations have to happen. I'm glad a lot of cards are going to be rotating. There are many, many others I don't care about, but I sure wish I could just hand pick a few cards here and there to move into Classic so that they stayed in standard format forever. I think there are just some good, well-designed, fun, important cards that just belong in Hearthstone, and I'd hate to see them go. Of course, wild format's always there. We can go take a brief little trip, take a vacation to visit these cards from time to time, and that's going to be a lot of fun. Sure, they're not lost forever or anything like that. They're not totally dead, but standard format remains my main mode of play, as it does for many other players, so some of these cards just will absolutely be missed. That said, I'm curious what you guys are going to miss. Which cards do you think deserve to stick around? Which cards are you sad to see go? Share that in the comments below, but until then, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, game on.